Mr McKelvey could not have been further from the truth with most of his speech.
Shane Ardern.
Chairman.
Well, before the member starts, I did give a caution that this is largely technical and it's about transition matters, and the member who was just speaking did get well outside of that. And if members don't want to talk on part two, you're inviting the chair to take an early closure. That's how it works. Shane Ardern.
Mr Chairman, I intend to speak entirely on part two, but can I reference first of all the comments made by the previous speaker, the scaremongering, I guess you could say, that's going on around the potential loss of ownership of Fonterra. As I said in part one, Mr Chairman, it is in dairy farmers' DNA to maintain 100% ownership of this industry, and can I just say it's not just a philosophical position, and it is entirely enshrined in part two under miscellaneous, Mr Chairman. It is not entirely a philosophical position. It is a commercially driven position, and it's a commercially driven position that is absolutely in the best interest of New Zealand Inc. So let's just talk about how that will be achieved, particularly in regard to the new sections 109A and new sections 109B in part two, Mr Chair, and that is the size and the protection and the ability of the fund, if you like, the fund and the fungibility, a new word that we learnt in the Select Committee that most of us hadn't heard of until we started down this track, in regard to maintaining the trading amongst farmers and the dividend fund. Can I just say, Mr Chair, that if the worst fears that were expressed by the previous speaker were to be realised, then the shareholders themselves, through the process of election of directors and chairman of the company, would address that. There's a track record of that over many, many years in this industry. In fact, over 100 years. In fact, it's lost, I think, in this debate that in Taranaki alone there were over 100 processing sites, and now there is one for the whole of the lower North Island. And so decisions have been made, will be made, decisions that protect the best interest of the industry. So let's look at what is in part two, transitional provisions for the application under section 73 or 74 of the Principal Act. Mr Chairman, those provisions and many others that are related and tied into 109, well, I'm reading it from the bill here, Mr Chairman. I'm not sure whether you've got the same one, but I'm certainly reading directly from the bill that is tabled in the House today. Those provisions themselves are a form of protection against some of the assertions that have been made by the opposition in the previous contribution. Can we look at the transitional provisions for notice of withdrawal under section 97 of the Principal Act, which are also covered in part two before we end up in the schedules, Mr Chairman, and that is also a built-in protection for some of the issues that have been debated by the previous speaker. Section 77, of course, and 77A is the area where the share price of Fonterra will be set by government if TAF doesn't succeed. And Mr Chairman, that in itself was a great concern to the Select Committee when it was first brought to the Select Committee, and an enormous amount of work and advice, not only from fund managers and valuers and advisors to the committee, and one of those was independent, thrashed that round and round and round and round. And when I look now at where we've finished up in terms of support in the House, I wonder why, as Chair, I let it go round as often as I did now, with the, I guess, naive hope at that stage we might reach a compromise position where we could achieve a bipartisan support for this legislation. So 77A was amended in the Select Committee. 77 is mentioned under part two of the bill, Mr Chairman. So with those words, Mr Chairman, I look forward to the passage of this bill through the House. It has been a contentious debate. It has been a thoroughly considered position that the Select Committee ended up in, and there was sufficient time for all of those that wished to ask questions, all of those that sought further advice, to have that advice delivered and furnished. And Mr. Chairman, I think we finished up in a position where we have a fair compromise.
I look forward to the Honourable